Like it if our panelists had a chance to introduce themselves and give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you do. And I know that our screens are kind of situated differently on each other's end. So Kody, why don't we start with you?
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kody Stoebig. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the program manager of the No Youth Media, which is a program of Youth Leadership Institute. I've been with the No since about 2014. I started as a youth reporter and a mentor, and eventually became staff, and I've been in my current position now for about 2 years. So the No itself has been in Fresno since 2006, and it's made up of young people from the ages of 14 to 24. And we like to say we're journalism with a sprinkle of community advocacy. And our main goal is to teach young people to tell their stories and the stories of their communities through a community health lens. And I will pass it over to Jim.
Great, thank you, Kody. My name is Jim Boren, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fresno State Institute for Media and Public Trust. I also teach journalism classes, advanced reporting in the MCJ department at Fresno State. And I've retired in 2018 as the executive editor of the Fresno Bee after a long career in journalism. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And I do want to say up front, CMAC has done an incredible job with media literacy, not just this week, but throughout the years, and it's really important. This is something that's been flying under the radar, and I really like the idea that CMAC is highlighting it so well. So big shout out to everybody that's done that. What incredible work that you've all done. So thank you very much for that. And I think I'll hand it off to Dympna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dempna Warju. I am the editor of Fresnoland, which is a lab at the Fresno Bee. And I've been doing this for 5 months. And I think it's important to explain what Fresnoland does. It's philanthropically funded, and we are really focused on reporting about land use, about water, about different communities and inequality. So we are focused on not only telling the stories of these different communities, but engaging with the communities to find out what their needs are, the stories they want to tell, and also to help explain part of what's going on, because especially for communities of color, which have traditionally been disengaged or misinformed on many, many aspects. Before I joined Fresnoland, I was the journalism instructor at Fresno City College and was more focused on training young people to graduate and to join the news media. So it's, I'm looking at things from a different perspective, and I'm really honored to be part of this discussion today. I don't know the next person to hand it over to, so.
Oh, that's okay. We're very honored to have all three of you with us today for this discussion. Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday to be with us. Lisa has a few questions, so let's jump right in. And I know we could spend the whole hour just talking about the No Youth Media, the Fresno State program, and Fresnoland. But we do have some questions. We'll jump into those, and we'll chat more about these programs before we wrap up.
So I think a great place to start, I want to get a sense of, I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious, from your experience, and I know that the answers may be different, and this is kind of a vague question, but can you describe the first steps you take in assembling a story? What is you've got a topic, you've picked one or something's been assigned to you, and internally, what are some of the things that you go through mentally to prepare and know how you're going to map out your process? in taking care of that story. And this is open to anyone and all of you. So.
I guess I can go first. When a story surfaces, I am for example, a few weeks ago, we found out that the West Fresno Family Resource Center, the building that houses the West Fresno Family Resource Center, had contamination and had to be evacuated while the city sorted that out to clean the place and how to make sure that people's health and livelihoods are not impacted by it. Okay, the first question is that I ask myself personally before I even think about whether this is an appropriate story for Fresnoland or not is, who is impacted by this event? Okay, and in that case, it's a large community, and these are probably people who have had more instances of polluted environment. And it's important that we, even if this isn't a story about this community is affected, but what about informing the community of what they can do to mitigate the problem that exists? So it's important first that you choose who is your audience. Who do you want to be your audience? How do you want this story to be told? Who do you want it to impact the most? And when you figured it out internally, and then the question is, who gave us the story? What's the source? Is it a source that could be trusted, right? Is it someone who, by giving us this tidbit, wants some publicity, whether it's positive or negative? Is it something we can trust, that we can go forward? I believe that you have to, first of all, take that opportunity to verify the source first, how credible the source is, what is in it for them. I always wonder in my head, why are they giving me this information? What are they possibly gaining from it? And when you verify all of those, then I begin to do the background research. For example, when was the building built? Was there a testing of the grounds before it was built? Who is involved in the building? How long has this testing been going on? Who has been told? Who could have been exposed to any injury in the process? You must take the time to educate yourself. And I have to, first of all, admit that I know very little about these chemicals and these pollutants. So it's entirely up to me to educate myself on what is what chemicals have been discovered, how harmful are they? And then what are the impacts to the various communities? What about the neighbors around that West Fresno Center? And also, what are you going to do with the people who have worked in that building for years and years and years? How are you going to make sure that they are protected? And so in deciding to tell the story, what does the community want to learn? Most people want to learn, are they too infected? Are their buildings and their homes, are they going to lose value because of this? And that's what we go into deciding the slant, how the story is told going forward.
Let me also piggyback on what Dempna said. I thought she laid out a really great process as a story unfolds from the time you get a tip and verify the motives. And even if the person has motives that are questionable, is the information accurate? Has in fact this occurred? And you know, I've done this for more than 4 decades as a journalist, and then now I'm teaching advanced reporting at Fresno State with my students, and it's all part of that same thing. Is that once you determine that you're going to move forward on a story, You do that deep research that Dempna referred to. And then you look for all the people, the sources that can help you tell that story in a fair way, and a straightforward and credible way. The people involved, as Dempna said, you know, neighbors and employees and people that work there. And then you pull in, you know, experts who understand these chemical processes, talk to city people about what can be done. And you pull all these experts together and try to get all the people that you have a full story. So you can tell that story in a credible way with trustworthy sources that has great authority because you've done great research on all sides of it. And you bring in all parties. In my classes, I have my students, before they write each story, put together what I call a mission statement. What is the mission of this story? What do we know going in? Who should we contact? And then as we work forward, we tweak that mission statement. And the mission statement is a guiding post for our student journalists to write their story. And it has all the kinds of things that professional journalists do. They do a lot of that stuff in their head and naturally because they've done it for so long. We're teaching this for student journalists, and they've found that these mission statements are really a good guidepost to telling a full and complete story.
Yes, we use something very similar at the No, where it helps our youth reporters also to kind of lay it out and to start getting into those great habits. And I think also something Dempna said that really stood out is focusing more on solution-based journalism, which I know is something Fresnoland does, and it's something we definitely try to do as well at the No, because it's very important, especially now, I think, to focus on what's happening, but also on the folks who are already addressing what's happening and who are working to improve it. So that's kind of something we include as the final step in our storytelling as well.
I just wanted to ask one quick question. Could you expand a little bit on solutions type journalism? That may not be clear for maybe people who are watching, but I know from my standpoint of what I understand is journalism has followed this path of here's a problem, right? And solutions yes. A little bit different direction to take in story or reporting.
It's definitely something I think that has emerged more in the last few years, at least in my experience. So, and I think it's especially important when you're working with young journalists. So the idea of solutions-based reporting is that you're still presenting the issue, you're still presenting all of the facts, but we usually do towards the end, you also want to include what's being done. So, and this doesn't have to be, this isn't opinionated, you're not necessarily backing anything, but it's a way to just include, especially for the public who maybe are brand new to an issue, it's a way to include what's happening to address it so that people don't leave the article feeling scared or hopeless. They leave it seeing that it is being addressed, right? And even maybe what they can do to help those who are addressing it. So it kind of just provides that next step.
Yeah, I
very cool.
think that I'm sorry, I'll be real quick. That solutions journalism piece is that, you know, first you have to focus on the problem because people need to understand that. You give them that deep dive in there. But also, we have many problems in our society. How do we fix it? Essentially, we do that. I like the idea in journalism is that you point it out and then you have a box, say, or a link, and what can you do to help? How can you help this? Who can you go to? Do you see a similar problem and can you report it? Working toward a common solution to make our community better.
I agree completely. In Fresnoland, we try to make that a part of every story that we write. Because what I've found, especially when there was a series that we did, Fresno Voices, that looked at the Black community and how disinvested that community has been all these decades in Fresno. And so we looked at it, the economy, job opportunities, unemployment. We looked at even health. And what we found was that if you do not provide the solutions or a way that they could seek solutions, people are left helpless. It's like, okay, so our lives are doomed, right? This is a way of saying that there are things that can be done. There are things that you can do to improve the air quality in your home, for instance. There are things you can do to make sure that if you have a health condition, that your doctor becomes part of your solution. And I really have come to value the part that the solution journalism plays in most news stories, especially when you're dealing with underserved communities.
So I wanted to circle back to another question, but Kyle, I see you unmuted your mic, so I wanted to give you
Oh, I was just going to say that was all great responses. Thank you.
Yeah.
And yes, yeah, follow-up questions are fantastic. Take it away.
I just wanted to circle back. You all three of you had talked about verifying your sources as credible. Can you talk a little bit more about what that process looks like for each of you?
I think it's the No is in a very unique position, I think, because we are so embedded in the community and community advocacy, especially, that we're often approached from folks who are already kind of in that authority position. So folks leading the change on the ground usually is how we'll hear about stories. So there is still obviously the level of checking their credentials, checking the sources, checking the data. But because we do have such a close relationship with them, we're often a little ahead of the curve on having to check all of that out once our young people get to them. But I know Jim and Dympna probably have much more experience in having to really check out their sources.
No, I think Kody is they're onto something there, because sometimes experts brings that information to you, and you learn that. The other thing is that you also have to step back from the story and say, okay, what are we missing here? We have this one side, and that may be the full story, but it may not be. So how do we bring in other experts to give credibility? And so that do we have documentation that has been verified, and that gives information, and that tells the reader that this is a state or federal report that has credibility, that's done by research experts. There might be a research report from a university that can help. There could be a national expert on this topic that you could bring in, and they may have seen a dozen of these kinds of examples around the country, and they could talk about what has been done in those areas. So verifying the sources, credible sources that have expertise, but also some of the most credible sources are the people that are directly impacted. Dympna mentioned neighbors and people that use that center. Are they having health problems? Are they worried about the contamination leaking into their water system, for example? And when they tell their personal stories about how they're impacted, that's very credible. And so you try to pull together, direct voices of people directly impacted, expert voices, and any others that come along. And oftentimes, when my students, for example, put together their mission statement, they think they have a pretty good idea of the sources, but as they start reporting the story, they realize, hey, there's a hole here. I need to go talk to this person or this expert, or what is the data in this particular area? So it's an evolving process, but all along you want to have that full balance so that you know the full story, or as much of the full story as possible. And sometimes you want to seek out critics that may have whatever's happening. What are the critics saying? Do they have a point or not? And represent their point, but also use that to test your sources, your other sources, and you go back to your other sources and say, well, this critic says that you're missing this, this, and this, and then they say either why or why not, or they may have a partial point, but here's the full story. So that constant process of working through a story and making sure that you talk to all the people that you think are involved and use data and other things. Data journalism is huge right now, and drives a lot of reports. But data sometimes gets a bit boring. So then you have the people that, okay, these people are affected. The data tells us, okay, let's find those folks. And that gives credibility to me.
Absolutely. I agree with what Kody and Jim have said. And I believe that stories are really about people and their experiences. And it's important to get to those people who have been directly impacted by the story. In my days at Fresno City College, my students, of course, would want to write a story, for example, about homelessness or about unemployment. And when I say to them, and then they would bring me what the statistics say, and that Fresno has this percentage of people who are unemployed. And I'll say to them, go find people who are unemployed, who have stories, real life stories to tell, and then you can start the story. I believe that they are the heart of the story, the real people who are impacted. Oh, I loved what Fresno State did at the beginning of the social justice movement when they put up a list of experts who understand what's going on in the Black community or who are experts in the Black community. And it kind of made the work easy, that you could go to one of those people if you're able to get in touch with them to comment on what was going on with that movement, to put it into perspective, but not only that, to bring it to our local community and put it into context in terms of how it relates to Fresno. Because while there was some movement in Fresno, you couldn't compare it with all the things going on elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that Fresno's situation is better than anywhere else. So I loved the fact that the people at Fresno State did that for everybody working in the media. It just simplified the work. And there are times when you go to the people who are directly impacted by an event, and they are not the most articulate people there are, but nevertheless, they've been impacted by the story. So they tell you a story that may be disjointed, and they may not tell it in a beautiful way that flows. Our job as journalists is how to still make them seem authentic, how to make their stories valid, even if it's not told in a very pretty, fluent way that most people are used to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something all three of our organizations are very much focused on. It's finding the who in the stories. And that's the first thing we teach our youth journalists at the Know, is that a story isn't going to really impact folks unless you put a face on it, unless you show who it is that's being impacted and what's happening to them. And so we actually have our young people start by writing their own personal narratives and examining their own stories, because then we found it gives them a really great perspective and appreciation for other people's stories and for helping them to tell those stories to the community. And so just by keeping it focused on the people, we found that's how we get the most authentic stories.
Wow, that's wonderful. So we're starting to get some questions coming in from social media, and I wanted to drop them in here. So this question is, how do you manage your internal bias as writers, and how do you remain factual and not include your opinion when you're creating and writing these stories?
Well, we all have our own points of view about all sorts of things, but as trained journalists, we can step back and try to tell that full and complete story. I often tell people, because of my reporting skills, I find out information. I can probably tell my critic's story better than they're telling their story, because we go out and talk to people on all sides of an issue. And you set aside your personal opinions because you give that full and complete story from all sides of an issue. Can personal bias slip into a story? Yes, possibly. I think that in journalism, especially in newspapers, there's a level of editors that a story has to go through that is a checks and balances on that. And I think that in that process, even in these diminished times with smaller staffs, is still in place. And I think the training allows you to step back. It's not unlike, a judge judging a case in the Fresno Superior Court. They have points of view, and they may sympathize with a particular plaintiff or defendant, but they have to make a decision based on the law and the facts that are presented in the courtroom, and not what they know outside the courtroom.
Absolutely.
And that's why opinions editorials exist. So especially with our young writers, they're very big fans of op-eds. So we just ask that they save it for that.
Absolutely. And I agree that sometimes you're moved by a story, and sometimes it is a struggle to really remove yourself from the story and just allow objectivity to prevail. And if it's really difficult, I don't think it's out of place to tell whoever you're working with that, you're too emotionally involved in the story, that you can't handle it objectively. It's something that is allowed every day. And for me, what I value as a person is when people are presenting information to me, I want to know both sides, okay, so that I can make an informed decision. Likewise, when I am presenting information to my readers, I think about the importance of balance, of putting all that information there, the good as well as the bad, the different opinions, so that they too can come to their own decision about the topic and not be misled or be given only one perspective that suits my own purposes. So I do it because that's how I like to get information. And I'm sure that our audiences would also like to get unbiased information.
Yeah, certainly. And so that we've got, especially now with the climate of what's going on, we have a lot of people who are aspiring to become journalists or citizen journalists and are stepping out and starting to, try to cover like protests and things like that. Do you have a recommended first step for any aspiring citizen journalists to help them get off on the right foot?
Well, I usually tell
Dan.
my students who want to have their own platform, start writing a blog. There's all WordPress, and there's several other free sites and cheap sites where you could actually start writing, and you can make it private and write it, and then you can make it public and get a following. That's a good opportunity to test your writing. And then as you get that, you might want to go over to, say, the Fresno Bee and say they have Valley Voices and they have other commentary, and they may want to use that, or other local media outlets to tell that story. If you're a multimedia journalist, you can tell that story with video and film, and right now podcasts are really popular. I know during the pandemic, one of my students as a final project came to me and was talking about, and this is early on, and there wasn't a lot of COVID-19 information available. And he said, and this is just a casual conversation we had, and he said that his family and their friends are mostly farm workers, and they consume their information in Spanish, and they just have not gotten a lot of good, credible information. And so he began translating on a weekly basis, aggregating the news that they want to know. For example, a lot of them bought a lot of supplies at Costco. They didn't realize that Costco was now requiring masks. This was early on, and Costco was one of the first retailers to require masks. You couldn't go in at all, not the recommended. You had to have a mask. Well, that hugely impacted, a direct impact. So I said, let's start a podcast, and that was his final project. He did a podcast on that. He's now continuing to do that, and he is translating into Spanish for a larger and larger audience COVID-19 news, and that's not accessible to Spanish speakers as readily as it is to English speakers.
That's amazing. Do you know the name of the podcast off the top of your head?
No, let me send it to you, and I'll put it in the link. I do, but I'm not recalling it right offhand. But I will send. I'll send it to you. Yes, for sure.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'd be happy to share it. Yeah. How else? What else? What other first steps would you recommend for citizen journalists?
I encourage them to join a journalism class or classes in any community college. Like Fresno City College has a wonderful journalism program. And many of our students who go through the rampage go and they do amazing things. And it's a first place and a great place to get that hands-on experience. Also, Fresnoland just launched a new program. It's called the Documenters. This is a new thing in this area, but it's existed in Chicago and Detroit for 2 or 3 years. And what we do is we train people to go and cover meetings of local governments around the Central Valley. You train them on how to take notes, how to recognize what is news and what isn't. And this is invaluable, the kind of training that they're getting. Like last night, we did a workshop on live tweeting. We teach them how to do interviews, also how the laws that govern their right to be in public meetings. They learn about ethics. They learn about, the Brown Act and some of these other things that you can only learn in a classroom. We expect that this is going to grow. And as more and more newsrooms are shrinking and budgets are disappearing, that this may become a huge asset to the news media in particular, because people can go to those notes that are gathered at these meetings and use them as the basis for news stories. It's great for people who are interested. It's really a great, great way to start, especially in a Central Valley. But I love what Jim talked about, blogging. It's amazing if you can build readership, if you can get people to follow you on your blogs. I think it's an amazing way to start.
Absolutely. And honestly, these days, so much of news, especially for young people, is shared on things like Instagram. So if you're seeking out folks who like our organizations here, like Community Alliance, like the college newspapers, if you're seeking those out and following them, you're going to learn just from following them. And also, they might have new programs happening. They might be doing community trainings. They might be looking for folks to come volunteer. And so just by seeking out the people doing that work already, you're going to kind of get your foot in the door.
Yes, that's all great. And yes, Dempna, I think the new Documenters program is awesome. I've heard about it, and I'm really excited, and I hope it does grow.
I hope so.
Yeah, great.
So I know that one of our interns here today has a question. Eli, would you like to take the floor?
Of course, yeah. So Dempna, I have a question for you. Considering that you've been very influential in the Central Valley and the Black community, and I just had a question, and that is, how can we make a story involving the Fresno community appeal and sort of relate to the people in areas outside of our community? So how can we get more people outside of our community looking in and having the mindset of just kind of going through what we're experiencing in the Central Valley?
Okay, thank you. I'm not really that important in the Black community, but you know, I'll answer the question. I think that whether it's here in the Central Valley or anywhere else, we're just a microcosm of what's going on elsewhere. So we look at our Black community here that's mostly concentrated in the southwest area of Fresno. You think of redlining, uh, you think of the brown fields, you think of unemployment, you think of the lack of training, you think of all these issues. They are duplicated everywhere else in Black communities around the country. And so that our stories, if told well, just bring up, the stories bring up those commonalities. And so that even if the person is located in Fresno or in Visalia or in Madera, the story is going to resonate because we're looking for that personal connection. This person is dealing with the same issues that another person who may live in Albuquerque is dealing with. The same issue that somebody in Miami is dealing with. What they have in common is that maybe they are Black, maybe they are young, and maybe they are unemployed or dealing with the same issues. The stories have to be told with a passion and told well. Okay, why do we read stories from the Washington Post or the New York Times or from elsewhere and find them engaging? It's because of the way they are told, and it's because the people that the issues in the story impact are relatable. It's about all our stories, even though he or she is the person that represents it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and thank you, Eli, for the question.
Yeah.
Do any of our other interns are ready for questions?
Yeah, I actually do. Oh, sorry, Myra.
Go for it,
So
Jan.
yeah, it's more like a perspective step back, like a perspective when you step back, sorry. What stories or voices do you think is missing or are missing from the mainstream journalism right now?
I mean, I think we'll all agree it's the stories about communities of color. It's the stories about underserved communities. It's the people who aren't being reflected in the newsrooms, so their stories aren't really being told. Like Jim shared with the Spanish speaking podcast. And that's not just here in Fresno, that's everywhere. I mean, we're certainly guilty of it also, but again, it's just the lack of representation leads to lack of knowing those communities, leads to lack of knowing their stories. And so then it's kind of just a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. One of the things that I found, for example, when the pandemic started, I had a story at the B. It started off about food insecurity. And the more you looked at it, it turned out that, you know, it's the same vulnerable communities. So whereas those of us who are privileged, we rushed to Costco, we bought up everything at Costco and we stocked them at our house. I found out that people in Southwest Fresno, for instance, they don't even have grocery stores. Like one of the people I interviewed went to the dollar store to buy the supplies that he needs. And when he went there, the shelves were bare already. And he had no other means to gather the supplies that he needs. And then you talk about some of these unincorporated communities where it's mostly farm workers who do not even speak English. They didn't know what was going on. When I talked to people from the Leadership Council, they had not been told what was going on. And so there was a panic. Nobody told them about social distancing. Nobody told them about wearing masks. Nobody told them that they should shelter in place. So there's a huge gap. And I believe that is where the media needs to focus on. We cannot continue to ignore these communities and be fair to everyone. And also with the election that's going on, again, are we making sure that every person in our area knows exactly what they need to do, knows where to go to turn in their ballots, knows that if they haven't received their ballot, that they should go ask for it? What is our responsibility in making sure that everyone within the areas that we cover has information that's necessary to save their lives?
Thank you. Thank you for your response.
And thank you, Jan, for your question. Yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you, Dempna. Myra, did you also have a question?
Yes, I do. This one's for all of our three panelists. So how do we tackle a story in favor of our community without offending our city officials that we come in contact with?
That's a good question, Myra. I wouldn't worry about offending city officials. Their job is to provide information, no matter who it's to. They're public officials, and this should be public information available to anyone, whether they're a journalist or a citizen. So always you go, you have a story and you go to those, all the people that you want. And if they're city officials, you always do it in a respectful way. You get more cooperation, but they're required to give you public information. And so you ask for it in a respectful way. And if they don't provide it, you ask again. And if, maybe you get ask it under a Public Records Act if you have to go that far. There's a lot of stories that offend public officials because journalists shine a light on things that are going wrong, and sometimes that is in government. So I wouldn't worry about offending anyone as long as you go about writing your story, producing your story, if it's broadcast or video or podcast, in a respectful way that has a full story that is fair and has even the critics. And if there's somebody at City Hall, for example, that is critical of the director's story, they'll give them a voice in your story. But I think that if we worried about offending public officials, for example, when we did our journalism, we wouldn't be doing a lot of journalism.
Yeah, and we tend to tell our young folks, if they face these issues, that if you're offending someone, you're probably doing something right. You're probably, like Jim said, you're probably shining that light where they didn't want it. So take it as a compliment. As long as you're being authentic and truthful and accurate, you can't really control how other people react to it.
Absolutely. And it's a duty that we have to look into what's going on in our government and to expose what is wrong. And I know a lot of people may not like it, but that's our job. And I would say you do your job and I'll do mine. And of course, there's always the possibility that next time when you go to that person, they may not talk to you or they would push you away. But then there are other ways of making sure that you get the information that you want. I think our first duty is to our readers and to the public that we serve, not the public officials or the government.
I want to add also, and Myra was one of my students a few semesters ago and did a fantastic job and is a great talent. So glad to see her as part of this program.
Thank you. And I see you, Jim.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you for the question, Myra. That was great. And thank you, Kody and Dempna and Jim, for your insightful answers. Yeah. I could just check in with Lisa one last time. Do we have any more questions? I think we've got time for one more.
So yeah, another question from social media, and this is really about media literacy and in teaching it in the home and things. And the question is, how do I start teaching media literacy to my little ones?
I mean, watch CMAC's videos on it. Truly, those videos are great, and you're not alone in having them. And there are a lot of really kind of bite-sized, really friendly ones that are a great introduction. That's the kind of thing we use at the Know when we start teaching media literacy. We use videos because truly, it's the way young folks absorb information now. I know I do. I'm definitely very visual, and so it really helps. So utilize those things that are out there already.
Absolutely. And in addition, monitor what sites they visit. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and young people are often, you know, easy to convince that certain things are going on that are not going on. I think it's somewhat the parents' responsibility to see what their kids are consuming, and also to be able to put things in context, to explain that it is a lie, that it isn't the whole truth, and explain things fully to children. They're gullible a lot, and you know, I think it doesn't hurt to watch the videos, but also explain over and over again. Don't believe everything you read, and always try to put them straight with the correct information.
And I think those are great tips. The other thing that, and I really like the idea that they're thinking about this issue when the child is young, because all the research shows that, well, young people and adults have been using technology for a long time. They really don't understand the impact mostly, and all the research shows that. So media literacy, I think, has to be what the experts call in school a curriculum driven approach, where we need to push our schools to teach media literacy at every level in all the core curriculum, and that it's really important for parents to talk to their teachers and their school principals and their school board members to get them to understand that media literacy needs to be taught throughout in all the classes. For example, a few years ago, everybody, excuse me, was talking a lot about we need financial literacy because people are being scammed and they're having high mortgage rates and high credit card rates. We're teaching financial literacy. Media literacy is the heart of everything now. You don't do anything without the computer being involved. And as Dempna said, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. There's phishing scams, people trying to get your financial information. So we need to really have an effort in this country to have media literacy taught very early in elementary schools. So when they get a high school diploma, they understand, how to access. It used to be that you teach them how to be able to balance a checkbook. We're well beyond that now. We need to be able to maneuver through technology in a way where technology is a friend and you're not opening doors to people scamming you.
Absolutely. And it really starts with the parents, right? And having just an open discussion, like Dympna said. We were recently involved at the Know with some research on how young people especially are getting news and information. And the number one answer was social media and families. So really it's if you're open and honest with your children about what they're seeing, what they're reading, maybe what's true, what's not true, and just continue that conversation, that's how it becomes second nature for them to start to question what they're seeing and kind of do that follow-up work.
Yes, and sometimes as parents, we often think our kids are too young to know some truths. I think, of course, it depends on the age of the child and the child's maturity, but I think it's important. For example, the election is coming on, to have a roundtable kind of discussion with your kids to tell them, here are the issues. This is how democracy works. This is what we do, and explain it to them so that they understand. Because I'm sure that if you, their parent, consumes any kind of news they must hear a lot of the noise and a lot of the shouting, and they are probably absorbing this without anyone explaining to them exactly why this is going on. So I think it's important. Tell them, why is this important to all of us? And how do we know what is the right and what is the wrong way to view these things? I don't think it's ever too young to begin to learn.
Yeah, because it is important, and there is a right and wrong way to go about it. Yeah, I think that's a great note to kind of start wrapping this up. I want to thank each one of you and give you an opportunity to tell us more about your organizations or programs and how people could reach out to you if they want to. Let's go in the opposite order that we did at the beginning. Dympna, if people wanted to learn more about Fresnoland or the Mentor program, how can they learn more?
The best way is through the Fresno Bee, and you look for Fresnoland, and read up on our mission, exactly what it is that we do, and you will right there on our landing page get information about everyone who is working on the Fresnoland team, and our email and phone numbers and all the contact information will be there. And remember that our primary mission is telling the stories that impact your lives every day. Your water, the air that you breathe, and how the people that we elect are utilizing the lands and the resources, and most particularly the different communities and the parts that they play in making sure that Fresno is a safe place for all.
Great, that's amazing. Yeah, fresnobee.com/Fresnoland. Check it out. It's a really interesting program. It's a great kind of incubator or lab. That's what I was looking for.
And
lab.
sign up for their newsletter. It's great.
Sign up for the newsletter. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. And Jim, if people were more interested in either contacting you or the Fresno State MCJ program, where can they look?
So we have a blog at the Media Institute. It's mediaandpublictrust.com, mediaandpublictrust.com. We have a lot of tips and information on that. You can follow the Institute on Twitter, Institute_trust. Our goal is at the Media Institute is to empower the public to be better news and information consumers. Our three main goals is to improve media literacy in our community, develop strategies for identifying fake news, and trying to bridge the trust gap between media outlets and news consumers. So you can get me at jboren@mail.fresnostate.edu. Would love to chat with anyone about our program. Thanks for the opportunity today. This has been great.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the Institute for Media and Public Trust, another excellent program. And last but not least, Kody, if someone's interested in the No Youth Media, how can they get a hold of you?
We are on all social medias and our website. So it's thenofresno.org, or our handle is thenofresno. We're definitely most active on Instagram. Our young folks run that usually. So check all of that out. All of our stories are available there. We also accept new members year round. So if anybody is interested and wants to join up, they can just reach out to us on any of those platforms. We do offer stipends for all work that our young folks do. So it's a nice way to make some extra money, especially during quarantine. And I also should mention that the three of us here are also on the steering committee launching a new program for journalists of color in the Central Valley. So we're currently taking applications for that, and that can be found on our websites as well.
Amazing. Yes, yeah, the nofresno.com. What was the name of this new program?
We don't have an official name because we want
okay.
folks to be involved in that, but it's the Central Valley Journalists of Color program.
Great. That's amazing.
Yes, and the nofresno.org, by the way. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the nofresno.org. Yeah, we look forward to seeing that program come together. Yes, thank you again to our panelists. Thank you, to everyone who submitted questions. If you're interested in learning more about Media Literacy Week, I know it's wrapping up, it's Friday, but you can check out medialiteracyweek.us for more information about that, the national program. You can also search social media for the hashtag Media LITWK, Media Lit Week, on most social media platforms if you want to see what other organizations are doing as a part of Media Literacy Week. And if you're interested more in CMAC, you can visit our website, cmac.tv.